Have you ever noticed how no matter what you achieve, no matter what you acquire, a quiet restlessness always lingers? You reach a goal, but the mind immediately moves on to the next. You get what you desire, but satisfaction slips through your fingers like water. This is not failure, it is the nature of the mind itself. Understanding this restlessness is the first step to finding true clarity and peace. The mind is a relentless traveler, always searching, always striving. No matter what it attains, it rarely rests. Each achievement, each acquisition is only a brief pause before the next longing begins. Satisfaction is not built into the mind's nature, it measures and compares everything, constantly evaluating what is enough and what is lacking. This ceaseless measurement creates an undercurrent of restlessness that most people never notice, yet it shapes every thought, every decision, every action. Desire fuels the mind, yet it is a double-edged force. While it pushes humans to act, to innovate and to grow, it also traps them in cycles of endless yearning. The mind mistakes the pursuit itself for fulfillment, chasing the next object, the next recognition, the next experience, hoping it will finally feel complete. But this chase is a mirage. The more the mind acquires, the more it convinces itself that something else is missing. The illusions of the external world deepen the mind's dissatisfaction. Achievements, possessions and status are temporary scaffolds that the mind leans on, hoping they will hold its restlessness. When they fail to provide lasting peace, the mind turns elsewhere, looking for what it cannot find outside. The constant comparison with others only amplifies the sense of insufficiency. There is no end to this measuring because the mind does not understand that fulfillment is never a product of circumstances. It is a state of being. Identification with thoughts and outcomes binds the mind even tighter. When one becomes defined by success, failure, recognition or desire itself, satisfaction becomes conditional, fragile and fleeting. The mind cannot remain still while it is trapped in this web of attachments. Every thought, every craving, every judgment reinforces its endless motion, and with it comes the subtle, almost invisible pressure that life is never enough as it is. Yet there is a way to step aside. Awareness of the mind's nature creates a space where restlessness loses its grip. Observing the mind without being pulled into its narratives allows a quiet, steady presence to emerge. Satisfaction does not come from chasing, achieving or comparing, it comes from being fully aware, fully alive and fully present with what is. The mind may wander endlessly, but when it is seen for what it is, the heart can finally find its quiet, unshakable fulfillment. Desire is a force that drives every human action. It is the spark that motivates us to grow, to explore and to achieve. Without it, life would remain stagnant and progress would be impossible. Desire in its natural form is a tool meant to guide, to push and to focus our energy toward meaningful action. It is not the destination itself, but the instrument that enables us to move forward. The moment desire becomes the master instead of the servant, it twists into a trap. What once inspired action now becomes a relentless demand. The mind convinces itself that fulfillment lies in the object of desire, whether it is recognition, wealth or power. Yet when the object is attained, satisfaction dissolves almost immediately, leaving the mind restless and hungry for the next craving. Endless cycles of longing emerge when we fail to recognize the nature of desire. Each new goal appears to promise ultimate satisfaction, but it only sets the stage for the next pursuit. The mind becomes a prisoner, constantly chasing shadows, mistaking the act of pursuit for the feeling of completion. This cycle creates subtle suffering, an invisible weight that shapes every thought and action. Understanding desire as a tool rather than a master changes everything. When you see desire as guidance, you act with intention rather than compulsion. You harness its energy to achieve, to create, and to move forward without being consumed by the need to possess or control. Desire becomes a partner, not a tyrant, allowing the mind to move freely without endless agitation. True freedom lies in mastering this relationship. When desire is held lightly, it energizes rather than enslaves. Action becomes joyful, decisions become clear, and the mind finds a quiet strength within itself. The endless chasing stops, and satisfaction is no longer tied to objects or outcomes. Instead, it arises naturally from the understanding that desire is meant to serve, not to rule, and life flows without the chains of constant craving. The mind is constantly looking outward, believing that happiness, peace, and completion exist somewhere beyond itself. It latches onto possessions, achievements, status, or the approval of others, thinking that these external markers will fill the emptiness it feels inside. Every new acquisition or recognition seems to promise satisfaction, yet the feeling always fades, leaving the mind searching again for the next source of happiness. This endless seeking creates a false sense of urgency. The mind measures itself against what others have, what society values, and what it imagines will make it whole. Comparisons become the yardstick for fulfillment, and no matter how much one accumulates, it is never enough. The illusion of external satisfaction blinds the mind to the truth that fulfillment does not come from the world outside. Relationships, wealth, power, and recognition all carry the promise of contentment, but they are fleeting. When the mind relies on these as the foundation of happiness, it becomes fragile and dependent. Any change, loss or disappointment outside can shatter the sense of peace, revealing the emptiness that external pursuits can never truly fill. True fulfillment is not an object to be acquired or a condition to be met. It is an inner state that arises when the mind stops mistaking the external world for the source of satisfaction. When attention turns inward and awareness deepens, the mind begins to understand that no possession, praise, or achievement can replace the quiet strength that already exists within. The more the mind chases outward validation, the further it drifts from its own center. Freedom comes when the mind disengages from this illusion and recognizes that the true source of contentment has always been present. The external world may provide tools, opportunities and experiences, but the foundation of satisfaction lies entirely within, untouched by circumstance and independent of outcomes. The mind constantly measures itself against others, comparing achievements, possessions and status. This constant measurement creates an invisible pressure that never allows it to rest. No matter what one attains, there is always someone who seems ahead, someone who seems to have more, and the mind cannot stop pointing it out. In this way, comparison becomes a lens that distorts reality and amplifies dissatisfaction. Envy quietly seeps into every thought when the mind uses others as its benchmark. Even accomplishments that once felt significant lose their value because the mind is too busy noticing what someone else has achieved. This subtle envy is corrosive. It quietly undermines confidence and joy, replacing contentment with longing and frustration. Frustration arises naturally from constant comparison. When the mind measures itself against the imagined success of others, it feels perpetually lacking. Every step forward is shadowed by what remains out of reach or what others have already attained. This creates a cycle where progress is never enough because the mind defines its worth externally rather than internally. The habit of comparing also blinds the mind to its own strengths and growth. By focusing on others, it loses sight of its unique path and potential. The energy that could be used to build, create, and evolve is instead wasted on judgment, envy, and self-recrimination. The mind becomes trapped in a loop of measurement that has no endpoint. Freedom from this trap begins when the mind turns inward. Satisfaction does not come from being better than someone else, but from understanding one's own growth and potential. When the mind stops measuring itself against others, it experiences clarity and strength. Comparison fades, and a sense of self-worth rooted in inner awareness replaces the constant restlessness that once ruled every thought. The mind is never still. It moves constantly, shifting from thought to thought, from desire to desire, like a river that never stops flowing. Every moment is filled with mental activity, and even in silence, the mind generates its own movement. This restless nature is not a flaw. It is simply the way the mind exists, always seeking, always analyzing, always reacting. Trying to force the mind to stop through external means only leads to struggle. People attempt distractions, indulgences, or strict routines to quiet the mind, but these efforts are temporary and often create resistance. The mind pushes back because it is not meant to be controlled from outside, its motion is natural, and attempts to suppress it only intensify the unrest. The constant flow of thoughts creates a subtle tension within even when one is unaware of it. Every thought carries momentum, and every desire pulls attention in a different direction. This hidden undercurrent shapes emotions, decisions, and behaviors, keeping the mind in a state of alertness and restlessness that can never be fully satisfied by external conditions. Understanding the mind's restless nature is the first step toward mastery. The mind cannot be forced into stillness, but it can be observed. Awareness of its patterns, its movements, and its impulses creates a space where the mind is no longer fully controlled by its own momentum. In this space, the energy of the mind can flow without creating inner turmoil, and the illusion of constant agitation begins to dissolve. True stillness emerges not from stopping the mind, but from being present with it. When observation replaces control, the mind flows like a river without causing friction within. Awareness itself becomes the calm beneath the current, allowing thoughts to move freely while the inner self remains steady and unshaken. In this way, restlessness loses its grip and a deeper clarity and peace arise naturally. When the mind clings to identity, it creates invisible chains that bind satisfaction to external conditions. Achievements, possessions, and recognition become markers of self-worth, and every thought and action is filtered through this lens. Success is celebrated not as a moment of life, but as proof of value, while failure is feared as a threat to existence itself. This identification with outcomes makes the mind fragile. Every situation, no matter how small, carries the weight of judgment. Compliments inflate the ego temporarily, while criticism wounds it deeply. The mind is no longer free to simply experience life, it reacts, defends, and measures every moment against an internal standard that is constantly shifting. Attachment to identity also distorts perception. When the mind equates self with achievement, every setback feels personal, and every comparison with others becomes a test of worth. Thoughts of inadequacy or superiority arise automatically, shaping behavior and creating subtle stress. Life is no longer lived for itself, but filtered through the need to maintain or enhance the self-image. Breaking free from identification requires awareness. Observing thoughts, emotions, and reactions without merging with them creates a space where the mind can act without being dominated by fear or pride. Achievements are appreciated, failures are noted, but neither defines the self. The sense of self becomes flexible, alive, and rooted in presence rather than in passing conditions. True freedom comes when the mind no longer seeks validation from outcomes. Satisfaction arises not from what is achieved or lost, but from the recognition that identity is not fixed. When the mind releases the need to be defined by success, failure or approval, it experiences a calm strength that is untouched by circumstance and independent of the fleeting measures that once ruled its sense of worth. The mind constantly chases external things, believing that fulfillment lies in acquiring more. Achievements, possessions, recognition, and experiences are all treated as the sources of happiness. Yet every time one is attained, the sense of satisfaction fades quickly, leaving the mind restless once again. True contentment cannot be found in accumulation because the mind is designed to move, to seek and to measure. Presence changes the entire experience of life. When attention rests fully in the moment, the mind stops leaping toward the next desire or concern. Every sensation, thought and encounter becomes more vivid, more alive. Satisfaction is not found in the object or experience itself, but in the depth with which it is perceived. Being fully present allows the mind to taste life as it is, without the constant overlay of expectation or judgment. The habit of living in the past or the future is what keeps the mind dissatisfied. Regrets about what has been or anxiety about what will come pull attention away from the only place where life actually exists, the now. By anchoring awareness in the present, the mind is freed from the chains of longing and fear. Inner stillness emerges naturally, and satisfaction is experienced as a quiet, unshakable presence. Awareness of the present moment transforms desire itself. Instead of chasing endlessly, the mind can act with clarity and intention. Choices are made from a place of understanding rather than compulsion. Even in striving or achieving, there is a sense of fullness because the mind is no longer projecting satisfaction into the future, but is rooted in the immediacy of experience. Contentment rooted in presence is not conditional or fleeting. It is not tied to accomplishment, possession or recognition. It arises from the recognition that life itself is complete, and the mind can participate fully without needing to grasp, control or acquire. Satisfaction is found in the depth of awareness, in the quiet presence that underlies all thought and action, independent of circumstance or outcome. The mind is never satisfied with reaching a goal because it immediately turns its attention to what comes next. Even after achieving what it once desired, it rarely lingers in the feeling of accomplishment. Completion exists only as an idea in the mind, not as an actual state that can be permanently experienced. The moment one milestone is reached, another is imagined and the restless motion continues. This constant pursuit creates a subtle dissatisfaction that colors every achievement. The joy of completion is fleeting because the mind is conditioned to define success as a moving target. No amount of accomplishment can provide lasting peace because the measure of enough keeps shifting. Every end becomes the seed for another beginning, and the cycle repeats without pause. The illusion of completion is reinforced by society and culture, which constantly tell the mind that more is necessary. Recognition, promotions, awards, and status are treated as markers of success, but each new achievement quickly loses its significance in the mind's relentless evaluation. Satisfaction is postponed, and the mind is kept in a perpetual state of striving. True understanding of completion requires recognizing that it is not a destination but a perspective. Completion is not something the mind can reach externally, it is experienced internally when one fully accepts the present moment as enough. When this awareness arises, achievements no longer control the sense of satisfaction. The mind can engage fully in life without being enslaved by the idea of what is complete. Freedom from the illusion of completion allows action to become effortless. Goals can be pursued with clarity and purpose, yet without the burden of needing them to define worth. The mind participates fully in effort and accomplishment while remaining untethered to outcomes. Completion becomes a natural state of understanding, not a chase for an external reward, and restlessness begins to dissolve. The mind is constantly in motion, filled with desires, worries, and endless chatter. This restlessness is the source of dissatisfaction because the mind believes fulfillment lies in controlling or changing external circumstances. Yet no matter how much one acquires or achieves, the restless nature of thought continues, creating a subtle but persistent tension that shapes every moment. Observation changes the relationship with the mind. When the mind is watched without judgment, its movement loses power over the inner self. Thoughts, desires and emotions can be seen for what they are, passing phenomena rather than commands that must be followed. In this awareness, the mind's grip on satisfaction weakens and a quiet clarity begins to emerge. The act of observing creates space. Instead of being swept along by every thought or craving, there is a pause, a distance, a moment in which the mind is noticed rather than obeyed. This space allows insight to arise, showing that restlessness is not a problem to be fixed, but a natural aspect of the mind that can be experienced without turmoil. Awareness itself becomes the foundation of fulfillment. It is not a reward, a goal or an acquisition, it is the simple presence that underlies thought. When one rests in awareness, there is no need to chase satisfaction externally because fulfillment is recognized as a state that arises from within, independent of circumstance or outcome. The more awareness is cultivated, the less the mind controls experience. Restlessness may continue to appear, but it no longer dictates mood, decisions or sense of self. Satisfaction grows naturally from the ability to witness without attachment, to participate in life fully without being caught in the endless cycle of desire and longing. In this space, the mind can move freely while the self remains steady, grounded and unshaken. The mind is constantly seeking assurance, wanting guarantees that every action will lead to success, recognition or reward. This attachment to outcomes creates pressure and anxiety because life is unpredictable and nothing can be controlled completely. When satisfaction is tied to results, the mind becomes a captive of circumstance and every obstacle, delay or failure is experienced as a personal failure rather than a natural part of life. Detachment does not mean inaction or indifference. It means engaging fully in every moment, every task, every relationship without demanding that life conform to expectations. Action is performed with clarity, focus and sincerity, but the results are accepted as they come. This subtle shift releases the mind from the chains of expectation and allows energy to flow freely, unhindered by fear or desire. Attachment clouds perception and limits creativity. When the mind insists on a particular outcome, it becomes rigid, resistant and reactive. Decisions are filtered through worry and obsession rather than understanding and intuition. Detachment frees the mind to respond to situations with clarity, to innovate and to act with confidence. Because the sense of worth is no longer dependent on external validation. Living without attachment cultivates a steady inner strength. The mind may still notice outcomes, success and failure, but these are no longer the measure of value or the source of satisfaction. Action itself becomes the source of fulfillment because the energy and attention given in the moment are complete regardless of what follows. Life is no longer a series of compulsive pursuits, but a deliberate participation in its flow. True freedom arises when detachment is fully realized. Satisfaction is no longer something to chase or demand from life. It exists naturally in the space created when the mind acts with presence, awareness and openness. The mind can move, strive and explore without being trapped by its own desires, and in this freedom, the deepest clarity, peace and fulfillment are found.